So I argue in the book that the transhumanist movement, which we can talk a little more about later, and I would also argue the woke ideology are both kind of, if you look at them through the lens of these being novel religions, they would be classified as what I call neo-gnostic religions. Gnosticism was a collection of different religious sects in the early centuries of Christianity that were sort of the main competitors to Christianity. And these different Gnostic sects had differences between them, but they had a few things in common. One of the things that they had in common was, first of all, they were elitist. So it's only a few that have access to the secret knowledge, gnosis, where we get the word Gnosticism, that really sort of know what's going on underneath it all. And those are the people that should be running the show. So it's an elitist proposition in contrast to, again, its main competitor in the early centuries of the church was Orthodox Christianity that said, in principle, salvation is available to everyone, not just to an elite class of people. That was the doctrine of grace that was proposed by Christianity. The second feature that the Gnostics had in common was a kind of desire to overcome the material world. And they had that desire because in their cosmology, the good principle or the good God created only the spiritual world, created the soul and created the angels and created the unseen realm. But the material realm was created by an evil principle that was sort of working against that good principle. So they saw material reality as fundamentally something that they needed to escape from or overcome. Now, again, in contrast to Christianity, Christianity had certain ascetical tendencies in relation to the body because of the doctrine of Christ's suffering and his crucifixion. But they also, Christianity never rejected the material world, right? Christianity acknowledged the material world and the spiritual world are both created by the same God, and that God is good. Therefore, the material world is good. It's affected by sin and the fall and so forth, but we can't reject it. And we certainly can't reject the human body because, in the Christian conception, Jesus Christ took on a human body and became a man, the second person of the Trinity. So these two competing theologies had different approaches to the material world and the human body. And the Gnostics recognized that the material world was ordered by sort of lawful processes, what we would call today the laws of science. But that order was something to be overcome. And so the material world was sort of the raw material that they could do whatever they wanted with. So they took two fundamentally different approaches to the human body. Some of the Gnostic sects rejected eating, drinking, and sex altogether. Like they would fast very, very rigorously, and they would sometimes forbid all sexual relations because reproduction was bodily and therefore it's bad. Those sects died out fairly quickly. You can imagine why. Hard to reproduce your ideas if you don't reproduce people. But other sects took a very sort of libertine approach to the human body. It doesn't matter anyway, so I could do whatever I want with it. And the idea was to escape this world into a higher spiritual realm, right? Rather, either through these extreme sort of ascetical modes or through just a total desecration of the material world and the human body. But in both cases, the human body was what I described before. It was sort of just this collection of hardware, this collection of physiological processes that I can do whatever I want with. It wasn't an organic whole that was naturally oriented toward health and human flourishing. It was just stuff.
Or made in God's image. That's what I'm thinking is.
Made in God's image and likeness, and therefore worthy of some regard and respect. Nature can give us a norm of health. So disease is defined in relation to the natural healthy, normal human functioning, not in relation to some cyborg that we need to enhance the human body to become bigger, faster, stronger, smarter. So this transhumanist project of trying to do just those things, right? Melding the human and the technological, making healthy people better than well, bigger, faster, stronger, smarter through gene editing, through cybernetics, through nanotechnology, and so forth. This is just a sort of microwaved version of a very, very old ideology. It's a new form of the ancient Gnostic attitude toward human beings, toward human nature and the human body, that goes beyond just this or that technological application of science to actually recreating an entirely new worldview. And as I argue in The New Abnormal, I think that conception of science and medicine, the technocratic, neo-gnostic conception of science and medicine, began to really overtake the traditional Hippocratic view of science and medicine that has dominated science and medical progress in the West since the time of Hippocrates.
Well, what you're talking about is very, very profound, I think.
One of the other uncanny analogies, or sort of the history beginning to rhyme, that occurred during the pandemic is precisely this very subtle shift that I described in the prologue of the book that happened with German medicine in the 1920s and the 1930s and led them down a very dark path. And again, caveat, I'm not comparing the current or the previous administration or our own leaders in this country to Hitler's Nazi regime, but nevertheless, there are these parallels that I think are very concerning in terms of the underlying mentality and the underlying arguments that are beginning to be advanced today. And so what happened to the German physicians in the 1920s and 1930s is that they became convinced that their primary allegiance or loyalty or fidelity was not to the sick individual patient in front of them, but to the social organism as a whole. So you had this metaphor being advanced in Germany of the Volk, the people as a whole, being healthy or sick. And if the people as a whole are healthy or sick, there are some members of the body politic or the population as a whole that are cancers because they're disabled, because they're a drain on resources, because they're criminalistic or whatever. And what does a physician do with a cancer but carve it out in order to enhance the health of the organism as a whole? So this is a very powerful metaphor that took hold in the minds of physicians in organized medicine in Germany and led very readily to the eugenics programs in Germany of forced sterilization, followed by forced euthanasia, followed ultimately by the horrors of the experiments conducted in the death camps. Well, this kind of subtle shift is, I fear, beginning to happen in American medicine as well. We're starting to hear people talk in these very same terms. Just the other day, in a New York Times piece that was published about another lawsuit that I'm filing in California challenging Assembly Bill 2098, which would be a gag order on physicians and allow the medical board to discipline any physician who contradicts the government's preferred COVID policies. So we're challenging this in federal court. The New York Times ran a piece about our case just a day or two ago. In the very closing paragraph, the head of the American Board of Internal Medicine, a very sort of powerful entity of medicine, organized medicine in the United States, said that physicians in California who are challenging this law need to understand that they have some loyalty or fidelity to basically organized medicine, to the quote-unquote experts that are making decisions about what doctors should be doing. And I immediately recoiled from that proposal because it's just not true. Our loyalty is to the sick patient in front of us, the patient who has to put their trust in us. And if our loyalty shifts towards organized medicine, if our loyalty shifts to some social program or some state program, however worthy it might appear, then doctors have lost their way. And they've lost their way because patients need to be able to trust us. Otherwise, nothing in medicine is going to work.